Good morning, good evening, or good afternoon, and welcome to an extra special edition of Across the Pitch. My name is Phil Kennedy, and I'm here with my co-host, Tony Robinson, where today we have a very special guest joining us who is a little bit of a different type of guest than we've had. We've, of course, had a number of Accrington Stanley players, of course, management staff, Andy Holt, the chairman, different supporters of Accrington, just about everybody relating to Accrington Stanley you can possibly think of on the show. But this time around, we have someone who, maybe has become an Accrington Stanley fan now. We'll have to find out a little bit more about that. But we have Josh Bland with us, who is doing a thesis project with Cambridge University, and he selected Accrington Stanley as a team that he was going to do some research on. About a month and a half ago, Tony and I actually were interviewed by Josh for his project. I know he's talked to a lot of different people in the Accrington community. And what we wanted to do was have Josh on the show to tell us about his thesis project, what he has learned about Accrington, the club, the city, the community, and if the Accrington bug has bitten him. So welcome to the show, Josh. How are you doing this evening?
I'm really, really well. Thanks, Tony. And Phil, how are you guys both doing?
Well, we're doing well. It's nice to talk to you again, Josh. And I know you've been busy getting all this research done. So hopefully you can share something with us. And we're looking forward to catching up with you and hearing all about what's been going on.
Absolutely, yeah. I hope I can say something that is of interest to everyone.
Well, we're really excited to have you on the show. And like I said, we really appreciate you taking the time with us tonight. And what we wanted to start off with was, just tell us a little bit about yourself, where you're from, your history as a footy supporter, who's your local club, all that type of good stuff.
Of course. So yeah, as people may have figured out from the slight accent that I've still got, I am born and bred in the Midlands. I'm from sort of the Birmingham, Coventry area, and I'm sure, like most people listening to the podcast, I've been a pretty fanatical football fan for pretty much my entire life. Really, I went to my first match when I was about 4 years old, and I've been going regularly ever since to the Hawthorns to watch the mighty West Bromwich Albion, who are obviously the team that I support. And I've always had it's probably my primary passion in life is football, and not just following the Albion. I think football.
The Baggies are your home team.
Yes, absolutely. And it's not just about the Albion for me. I think I've always had a real strong interest in, I think, football culture, and I've always felt, from quite a young age, that I've always been interested in how football, I guess, interacts with society at large, and so. My background as an academic is I have studied history as an undergraduate, and I'm now moved into an MPhil master's degree at Cambridge, studying sort of heritage studies, which is, I guess the way I describe it is it's sort of like an applied history degree. It's still got obviously like a real historic slant, but it's more about studying museums and institutions of culture, and it's more about sort of public history, I guess. And my research interests really have been completely guided by my undying love for football. And so what I'm trying to do in a broad sense is start the conversation around trying to protect football clubs like the Albion, like Accrington, under heritage legislation, and get them protected in the same way as you might protect a listed building or a museum or an arts centre, and start a conversation within academia around starting to look at possible avenues for getting these football clubs protected under cultural heritage law as sort of proper community assets. So that's really my background, where I'm coming from. So yeah, I'm a lifelong football fan who was trying to.
I mean, what you're saying, it's absolutely true. Where Accrington Stanley, the football club, it's as historic and representative of Accrington as any historic building or statue or anything like that. I mean, and Tony will attest to that. Tony, when you tell people that you're from Accrington, what's the first thing they say?
Oh, it's always Accrington Stanley. Because the name Stanley goes with the town. That's always the thing that crops up. But I think what you just touched on and about history and when you go back, and I mean, when you look at West Brom and although it wasn't Stanley, it was still a team from Accrington, where both teams were founding members of the Football League in 1888. So I think there's that connection too between the two areas, which I think is unique because there's only 12 football towns that can lay claim to that. So I think with you're looking into history, there's a connection right off the bat.
Absolutely, and I think that sort of connection. Certainly as a West Brom fan, and I know it's the case, I've spoken to countless Accrington fans over the last 3 or 4 months, and it seems to be a real point of pride, that, and I know, speaking as an Albion fan, that sort of status as being one of the sort of founding members of the Football League is something that is really, really important to Albion fans, and it is a sort of like a seminal part of my identity as a West Bromwich Albion fan, really, and I know it's the same for everyone else. So it's one of the reasons, and we can sort of get into this in more detail, is that sort of historic sort of antiquity that I guess Accrington Stanley has as a football club and as an institution is definitely one of the reasons that I have sort of zeroed in on it as a really interesting study.
Yeah, I mean, I think that was one of the things that we definitely wanted to ask you about first is what was it that made you choose Accrington Stanley specific out of all of the clubs in England? What specifically made you finally say, Accrington, that's who the team is? Because it's funny because, we kind of had a similar thing when we originally started the podcast back, I guess it was almost 4 years ago now, where we had said, we want to find a lower level English club that's going to be our flagship club for the show, and that's how we zeroed in on Accrington Stanley, and we've told that story over and over. But what's your story on how did you finally come upon Accrington Stanley as the team to do your thesis on?
Yeah, of course. So, I mean, in terms of the study itself, obviously, the way that it sort of structures and the way that it has to work, if you're trying to prove any sort of point within academia, you have to use some sort of case study and some sort of example. And I think when I was trying to sort of really thrash out exactly the case for football clubs being these sort of historic institutions of heritage, I needed to pick a club which I think had a really distinct history. I wanted to specifically pick a club that was in a town that had a sort of industrial heritage, which I'll sort of come on to in a second. And I wanted to pick a club which I think in a practical sense, I felt like I could effectively get to and talk to the people that I needed to talk to do a really effective study. So like a lot of people, I first sort of, I've always been aware of the history of Accrington Stanley, and this is certainly something that I think I've spoken to both of you guys about before. It's a club that has, outside of Accrington, a reputation that is almost unlike any other club of a similar stature, really. And it is so famous, and it has such an intoxicating story of it sort of going out of business and almost being built back up and preserved by the community itself, and is obviously now, no disrespect, but punching way above their weight in League One, and that story of just plucky little Accrington really, really punching above their weight is so enchanting, and it's so ripe for this sort of study. So definitely the history and the on-field history of the club is definitely an element, and I think as well that the town of Accrington is something that I'm really, really interested in. I think one of the big things that is coming out of my study is I think football has a really, really interesting relationship, not just in Accrington, but I think across all of England with especially in places where there has been industry and maybe that industry has gone away. There's been a process of deindustrialization. And I feel increasingly that, and this is certainly the case in the Midlands where I'm from, in areas like Sandwell and West Bromwich around the Albion, and areas around Walsall, and definitely other places in the northwest around Lancashire, places where there has been industry. And obviously in Accrington, the cotton mills and the brickworks and the engineering plants were absolutely seminal to the town's very existence. And when towns like Accrington obviously lost that sort of that industry, that there was a real void. And one of the trends that I'm really, really picking up is that football clubs like Accrington Stanley really, really can step into that void and provide a sense of identity. It can renew a sort of sense of like civic pride and really, really foster a really, really close relationship between a person and their hometown. So I think it's this really sort of unique case where it's in a sort of post-industrial town. It has a unique and really storied history. And then on a practical level, it's a club where it's so open and it's run in such a fantastic sort of communicative way by Andy Holt and everyone there, people like Dave Burgess, that I always felt that I could talk to the people that I needed to be able to really, really do an effective study. So it's a sort of a mix of, it's somewhere in that sort of triangle of different factors, I guess.
Well, I think you touched on there with the industrial history of Accrington and a lot of towns across that area, which really follows the Leeds-Liverpool Canal, because without that, the industrial Northwest might not have grown the way it did. And then football followed that, because you look at Preston, Blackburn, Burnley, Accrington, all founding members of the Football League, all with the industrial history. But one thing I wanted to touch on is, did the milk advert have any influence or impact on your research or decision?
I mean, I guess not really, insofar as I think that those other factors were much more important. But what I would say about the milk advert is that when I first heard of Accrington Stanley when I would have been a kid, 15, 16 years ago. And it was through that milk advert. That milk advert was the first interaction really of any substantive nature that I had with the club. And I think obviously I've talked about there how important it is in my decision to pick Accrington that the club itself has got this really, really storied past. And as much as the milk advert seems to be justifiably so, in my opinion, the bane of a lot of Stanley fans' existences, it really is like a massive seminal part in Accrington's sort of popular reach. I know, Phil, when we had a chat, you talked about Accrington's stickiness and about the club having this sort of this stickability in your memory and the story and the sort of all the culture surrounding the club. There's something about it that you sort of really, really people latch onto. And I think the milk advert is a huge part of that, because it was such a, it was on for 6 years and such a cultural phenomenon in this country. So yeah, go on. Sorry.
And I like the fact that they did an update a few years ago that didn't really get as much play, but they'd had Ian Rush come on and say, well, Accrington, they're not quite as bad as they used to be, kind of thing. So it's funny that has some staying power, but it's something I think as an Accrington fan that I think a lot of people have embraced now, because it's there. You can't ignore it, so you might as well embrace it and move along with it.
Yeah, exactly. And this is what I'm saying about, really trying to hammer home the fact that I don't see football clubs as simply defined by what they do on the pitch. And I don't see them as simply sporting institutions. And football clubs at every level have got a real, a cultural reach. And it's really difficult to try and delineate between sort of sport and what is football culture and what is popular culture. And Accrington's sort of that advert is, Accrington's main bleed into, I guess, popular culture in this country. So it is unavoidably a huge part of the club's history.
I think with that particular advertisement, you really hit the nail on the head with the stickiness, which is something that I think the name Accrington Stanley, I mean, this is something that Tony and I have discussed quite a bit, is, just once you hear Accrington Stanley, you don't forget it. Same thing with that milk advert. Once you see that, you don't forget it. And it just has that stickiness. And, it's one of those things where I think that as an Accrington supporter, and maybe not necessarily so much now, but through the years, you've kind of had to have a bit of a sense of humor and be able to be self-deprecating, if you will. And I think that with that advert, the fact that, there were other teams that had turned it down and said, no, you can't use us. And just the fact that Accrington had the sense of humor to say, yeah, sure, go ahead and use us. I mean, that's just kind of the whole personality of the club, is that, I think that Accrington Stanley, they know that they're not Barcelona or Manchester United even, but really Accrington Stanley, what we embrace is the biggest little club in the world moniker, and the team that wouldn't die. And I mean, I think that's something that you kind of hit on with the history a little bit. I mean, how many clubs are out there of Accrington size that have that many kind of well-known slogans like that even?
Exactly. I mean, it's such a rare thing. It really, really is such a rare thing. And I guess as well, I mean, what you're touching on there about that whole sort of, that sort of little old Accrington sort of narrative, I guess, that's attached to the club. And undoubtedly, obviously, the club is punching way above its weight in League One, as I said, and is an established League One club. And what I think there's a really, really interesting interplay that I've sort of been observing in a lot of the interview and survey works that I've done, is that a lot of Accrington's heritage, be it, the pals or the industry, has got this, what I would describe as a declensionist narrative. And what I mean by that is a lot of the sort of the stories and heritage sort of tales that are attached to Accrington have this sort of downwards trajectory or a sort of tragic element to them. And it's about loss, or it's about sort of looking back at an industrial golden age that doesn't exist anymore. And what's really, really interesting about Accrington Stanley is that, to me, it's pretty much the only cultural institution or heritage institution in the town that has got this really, really positive spin. And the club, in a lot of ways, and certainly in a lot of the people I've interviewed minds, has almost become a sort of a metaphor, a sort of a feel-good story attached to the town that can really help reestablish a sense of self-esteem for the town without its industry, and sort of the club's successes have almost become one and the same with the town's successes, and in that regard can really build a really strong sense of civic identity in a place where I think for a long time has maybe been a bit bereft of that.
Well, and I think that's an excellent point, because I think if this is one of the reasons why I think a lot of people feel that Accrington Stanley has to stay, cannot go out of business like they did in '62, because I think a lot of people would think that would be like one of the nails in the coffin for Accrington. And I mean, it's just because it seems to be, like you said, a feel-good, positive story, especially in the last few years with what Andy Holt's done, and reinvigorate the club and the town and the buildings that he's putting in, the lounges and that, are for the community, not just for the club. But you've made some trips up to Accrington. Was there any surprises, like when you get up to Accrington and see the club? Is there anything that you thought, well, I didn't expect, or was sort of unique or eye-opening?
Yeah, totally. I mean, look, like I said, I mean, I picked Stanley because I was aware. I mean, I've done some other, alongside my MPhil, I'm doing some other work in football, which I think we'll talk about in a little bit. But it's, I was aware of its reputation as being an uber friendly, uber open, really sort of strong communicative club. But I was really genuinely taken aback by the aggressive friendliness of not only everyone at the club, but everyone in and around town as well. I mean, so I was last up there I went up for a few days. It must have been about 2 or 3 months ago to go and conduct a couple of interviews, do some field work and get some sort of local history sources from the library up there. And, I interviewed 2 or 3 people and I was, they were always keen to ask, where do you want to go next? Do you want to lift anywhere? I can drop you. Yeah. And turning up to the club, literally just, I walked up to the club offices at the Wham Stadium. And, I spoke to Dave Burgess, and within 5-10 minutes of being there, I was pitch side in the ground, having a look around, taking photos. And I think that is, it's a microcosm in a lot of ways. That's how I want football to be. I wish other football clubs, and I wish my football club was that open and that transparent and that friendly. I think just the access and the just people falling over themselves really to help me, it was not something that I anticipated at all. And it was, it's been just absolutely fantastic. And it really does, I have such a fondness for the club now, and I have such a soft spot for the club as a lot of, I think, outsiders to Accrington do. And it's so much of that isn't anything really to do even with the story of the club. It's to do with the people that I have encountered and people like you guys who I've spoken to. And it just, like I said,
you hit
community
the nail
feel
on the head. I've said this so many times, is that the history is what brought me to Accrington, and the people are what won me over.
Completely. And the fact that, like when I went up there the first day, Dave Burgess, the MD, is sat on the front desk, and I can just have a big 40-minute chat with him, and he can show me around the ground. And the fact that, Rob Houseman, the supporter liaison officer, gave me 2 hours to tell, stories from his life, and again, just walk me around the pitch, and I got shown into all of the new building site and things like that. And I think it goes beyond just willingness to help. I think genuinely the impression that I got is of a community of people who are just bursting with pride about their club, which is fantastic to see. It's fantastic to see, especially, supporting a team who sort of flitted between the Premier League and the Championship. It's great. I feel part of a fairly tight-knit community of Albion supporters, and I feel very proud of my heritage and the history that you have at your disposal as an Albion supporter. But I've rarely seen a club that has like this attached community of people that is so tightly knit and so close and so just proud and just, like I said, just bursting with pride at their club, and so just wanting to sort of share that experience with you. I think it's a glorious thing.
Is that because they're a smaller club in the sense of, when I say in League One, they're not a championship size club or a Premier League, any of that nature, where you get the 30, 40, 50,000 people watching a match? That's got to have some bearing on this process, because when you say small, but it is small in the number of staff and the budget and the players. It's just everything is small in the sense of a size, but not accomplishments.
Yeah, for sure. I think when you're sat in it's very, very, very easy to feel anonymous when you're sat in I had an away season ticket for years and years and years at the Albion, and you go to these grounds like the Emirates and Old Trafford, 60, 70,000 seater stadiums, and I think it's really, really difficult because you've got people coming sort of all over the world, quite disparate experiences, and it's very easy to feel anonymous in a crowd of that size. But I think one of the things that is really, really great about Accrington is the fact that the core supporting communities remains quite tightly knit and quite small and very, very local. It's quite unusual in that sense that a lot of the time you get people who have, not unlike yourself, Tony, who have sort of left a local area and sort of maintained that connection. Yeah. And I still feel like Accrington has an unusually locally based supporting core who are there sort of every week. And I think, so, people will be at the ground and you can see someone on the other side of the ground and walk around to them and chat to them. And it maintains that real, like a really tightly knit, almost sort of like industrial era style tight-knit community where there's like a really, really strong bond and social relationship that's formed between fans. One
of the things that really sort of they joke about Man United is that to have a season ticket, you got to live outside of Manchester, because it's that type of a setup where most of the fans travel into Manchester, where it's not the case with Accrington. But I know what you said. You've traveled up there. You've met and interviewed several people, lots of people on this thesis. is there a couple of people that stand out as sort of really interesting characters, or somebody that really sticks in your mind?
Yeah, there was two or three really. I guess the first one would be, and I think this will interest your listeners possibly the most, is that I had a good long chat with Seamus Keneally, who's obviously your club captain, very, very good player. And what struck me about Seamus was he was, I guess this is with the risk of spreading a certain stereotype about footballers. What struck me about him was not necessarily even his sort of intelligence or how reflective he was, but how much the weight of responsibility of being sort of an ambassador for the town, an ambassador for a community of people, really seemed to weigh heavily on him. And he talked at great length about the work that he's done with the community trust, and really talked about how he felt really, I guess, responsible to and for the town, and making sure that the people of Accrington have got something to be proud of and something to look forward to at the end of the week. And he spoke really, really well about it. He spoke in it almost as, I get, ambassadorial is the way that I would describe it. He really seemed to feel like he was an ambassador for Accrington, which I thought was so interesting. And then I think as well, I had a very, very long conversation, as I said, with Dave Burgess, and hearing about the management culture at the club and exactly how they try. And again, I think the word sort of responsibility comes up. They seem to really be tuned into the needs of the town, the needs of the community, and I think the needs of the community as well, beyond as football supporters in the town. I think that there's a degree of, and Dave talked about this really, really eloquently, about the civic responsibility that a club like Accrington has in a sort of back to the wall working class town like Accrington, to provide genuine support, a shelter at times for people in the town, and also to really sustain a sense of togetherness in a context now with increasing sort of mobility and increasing digitalization. And I think we're living in now an age where there's almost unprecedented isolation at Accrington's, and the way that they're running the club is to really make it a preserve of like collective unity and sort of collective identity and sort of local pride, which I think is something to really, really, really be admired. So yeah, I think the interviews, obviously all of the interviews that I did with people who don't necessarily work with the club were fantastic, and hearing from various people about their experiences growing up was great. But I felt really, really privileged to be able to talk to a few people actually within the club itself and how they shoulder the responsibility of representing this, the brilliant town of Accrington.
It really is incredible just how all of the players and, like you said, members of the management staff, members of the, everybody from Andy Holt, John Coleman, all the way down to the ball boy. It's just, everybody is kind of walking in lockstep, if you will. And it's, everybody, it's, one town, one club, one goal. And, Seamus and Dave Burgess, they've both been on the podcast, and they're just, fantastic to chat with. And like you said, their commitment to the community is impressive beyond just what happens on the pitch. But let's turn topics a little bit, because we've talked a lot about the community aspect of Accrington and the history. But the other thing that I find really unique about Accrington is the business aspect. And like you said many times, Accrington is really punching above their weight in League One. And I'm sure that you've gotten into some of the budget things, because Andy's really transparent about that on Twitter. And I'm just wondering, from the outside looking in, do you feel that Accrington has kind of found a financial recipe for success that other clubs should be following?
Yeah, I mean, in short, yeah. And I think this is, I guess I can illuminate this a bit, because I am a supporter of West Bromwich Albion. And for those that don't know, we are owned by a Chinese sort of conglomerate who are very faceless. They're anonymous. They sort of want to put the club up for sale. They're not particularly running us in a financially sustainable way. We're basically completely reliant on parachute payments, and I think if we stay in the Championship for a couple of seasons, we're in real bother. So coming at it from a place of supporting and loving a club whose finances are a bit of a mess, yeah, absolutely. And I think the key is, obviously Andy has got the money and the resources to be able to. He's got a tight model, tight wage structure that means that everything that he's doing is going to be self-sustaining. I think what impresses me even more in sort of a governance sense, and I should just add here, probably declare. So a lot of Accrington fans will have, actually a couple of months ago now, that Accrington had become a fair game club. Joined up with this sort of group of other EFL clubs who were looking to improve governance in football. And I am, alongside my degree, I'm the director of policy for Fair Game. So football business and governance is something that I am working on actively. And I'm trying to write legislation with this sort of lobby group that's going to try and reform the game and try and basically get more clubs to run themselves like Accrington Stanley. And it's something I'm highly involved with in actively trying to improve the game. And I think that the victory for Stanley isn't necessarily just about finances, but about the sort of culture of governance as well, and about that transparency and about the quality of their sort of transfer model and the way that they're not spending too much money, but they've got a really, really effective scouting system, a really effective sort of talent identification system that makes up for that in order to get sort of real gems from non-league. And so So basically, I've answered in a very long-winded way your question. So yes, I think they've got a fantastic financial model, but I think what makes the club really, really fly is not just the finances; it's the culture of transparency and it's the culture of sustainability that is the real victory.
Well, I think with Andy Halton, he said this to us, that he didn't get in it for a long term. He sort of took over the club, and he looks at himself as a caretaker, and he wants to sort of build the foundation. Build the revenue streams and so it's self-sustainable, and then be able to pass it on to whoever comes next. So he doesn't want to label or drop people with a big debt or whoever comes in. Like when he come in, he had to clean up a lot of, quite a mess. So I think in the sense that the business model he had from that standpoint, it's going to probably make it easier when he decides to sort of back off and just become a fan and not be the chairman. I think he's going to make it easier for other people to come in to sort of run the club, don't you think?
Yeah, 100%. And I think it's really interesting, that whole sort of rhetoric about, oh yeah, I am a caretaker, I'm not the chairman, I'm not the owner, the fans own the club and I am merely a custodian. Lots of chairmen say that. Lots of chairmen. It's a real sort of cliche line that's trotted out a lot of the times whenever a new owner comes into a club. With Andy Holt, he's one of the few people that I've ever come across and that I actually feel like that is genuine. And like absolutely, I think the position that he's going to put the club in long term is going to make it so much more attractive when the time does come for eventually him to sort of hand the reins over, and long may it continue. There definitely needs to be, as someone who is looking to actively work in not only through my academic work, but also my actual, the job that I've got on the side with Fair Game, actively trying to improve football and introduce stuff like a financial regulator. People like Andy and are the people that we need running football clubs.
I was just going to say real quick, I think that's an excellent point that you make about Andy, because I think, nobody's ever going to agree with 100% of everything he says. But you always know that he's going to give it to you straight, and he's going to say what's on your mind. What's on his mind. He's not going to gloss it over, and that's something that I really respect about him. Is that like he said, he's going to give you what's on his mind.
Well, what I was just going to add to that, Phil, is that he said this before, is that he said, I live in the community, in the area. Yeah. He said, I got to go out to the pubs and the restaurants. And I want to be able to go in there and have a pint and have a nice meal without people complaining about what's going on at the club. So he's transparent, but that's his nature. I mean, he is what you see, and he's just so transparent that I think it's I don't think it's unusual in sports, but it's refreshing, and especially for he's just been the right person at the right time, to bring the club forward. And I think that's probably obviously in your research, Josh, has come through, I guess.
Yeah, absolutely. And I tell you what better motivation to run a football club properly than just a peaceful pint without getting dogs abuse from the locals.
Yeah, it's true.
Yeah, exactly. We've covered a lot of what we had put on the list that we sent over to you. Was there anything that we hadn't asked you about that you wanted to make sure we talked about today?
Look, not necessarily. I think. I mean, Accrington. I've sort of chosen obviously Accrington as a case study in this masters. And I feel like it would be good for the listeners to know that. I mean, this is really the start of a much sort of longer journey of this sort of type of research that I'm going to be doing. So I'm finishing my masters now. I'm just finishing writing up the project over the next 2 or 3 weeks. But then basically in October, the whole thing starts again because I've been given. And I think I've been quite lucky. I mean, I am the jammiest SOB alive, I think. I've been given funding to do a full PhD here at Cambridge, which is going to be hugely expanded with a lot more resources and a lot more funding to be able to do research. A much more holistic look at clubs in the Midlands and the Northwest, investigate, trying to really, really make the case strongly that clubs are cultural heritage and we need to preserve them and protect them under heritage law. So Accrington, really, this whole case study is a starting point for what is to me going to be a much longer journey over the course of the next 3, 4, 5 years of me really putting the work together, completing my PhD. In an ideal world, hopefully that will be turned into a book of some kind. And alongside that, I'm going to be doing all of my work, my policy work with Fair Game as well. And I'm actively working with Fair Game and the independent review of football that's going on in this country as well, to try and sort of improve the way the game is run. So I just hope everyone knows that it's not just a sort of it's a passion project, but it's a passion project that I really I'm trying to use to improve the future of football and to make sure that clubs like Accrington, clubs like West Brom, the clubs that we love, are protected, are run sustainably, and we can pass on to our kids and our grandkids and sort of enjoy the experience and the conversations that come from being a football fan for generations to come. So I hope that is, that really, really comes across to listeners that this is part of a much bigger project here to try and really save football, I guess.
Yeah.
I'm going to do it.
Well, if people want to, will they get a chance to see the results of your thesis, or is this something that's going to be accessible to the Stanley fans?
Right. So this is where it becomes difficult. This is a an internal examined sort of thesis, which is technically now the copyright property. As soon as I submit it, it will become like the copyright property of the University of Cambridge. Now, if it's of a high enough standard, which I'm hoping it will be, there's a strong chance that I could try and get it published in an academic journal. The truth is that with the rigmarole that goes around academia, which I don't want to bore everyone with, the likelihood is that wouldn't happen for another 2 or 3 years, because it would have to be reviewed and edited and go through a whole sort of process. So like the earliest this would be published, if it does get published, would be sort of late 2022, early 2023. So a way away. However.
Okay.
Wow, that's quite a process.
I know it's I'm sick of it. But what is much more likely to get to see the light of day is obviously with me starting this PhD, the end result of my PhD will definitely be published when that's finished. Now, again, that is going to be 4 or 5 years down the line. But the research that I'm doing now is all building up to this huge PhD project that's going to come out and will hopefully be properly published as a book that you'll be able to go out into your local bookshops and be able to get. And so that's what I'm doing. I'm using the sort of the platform that Cambridge University gives you as such a prestigious sort of institution to be able to sort of really leverage and get these arguments to protect football out there. And everything that I'm doing with Accrington now is going to be a really significant part of that 3, 4, 5 years down the line. So you're talking to me really at the genesis point of what is hopefully going to be a much bigger sort of
a journey.
Yeah.
So it's the start of a long journey, but an important one. Yes, exactly. Excellent.
It's just incredible the work that you're doing, and I just want to thank you for everything that you're doing in terms of especially with fair game, because like you said, I mean, it's important that these clubs that we love so much stay around, and you know, with the financial situation these days, and you know, all the greed at the top level, because there's really no other way to put it. It's very important that, you know, at the grassroots level, that there is things being done to make sure that, like you said, these clubs are still around, and that these teams never die, to take a page from the Accrington Stanley book. And I just want to congratulate you on everything that you're doing, and you know, all of your work, and you know, like you said, Cambridge, it doesn't get any more prestigious than that, and you know, it's an honor just to have you on the show and to be involved in your project.
Yeah, absolutely.
Go on. You know, I was just going to say the pleasure's all mine. I think that, genuinely, it's the responsibility weighs heavy on my shoulders, really, and like I just. I think that I'm much more honoured to feel like I am now involved in the remarkable sort of community that is Accrington Stanley. I think that is far higher than the honour of me being on that podcast. It's just being involved in Accrington now is just brilliant.
Well, it's brilliant to talk Accrington Stanley with you. And the last thing I wanted to ask you about is Accrington season, of course, kicked off on Saturday with not the result we were looking for, but 45 games left to play, and I think we'll get plenty of points there. But have you had a chance to watch Stanley on the pitch? And if so, what are your thoughts on where do you see Stanley finishing at the League One table this year?
Yeah, so to answer the question in two parts, really. The first, so I've been to the WAM before to watch football, and those with a sort of a semi-decent memory will remember West Brom Albion came up to the WAM, and I think in the Carabao Cup, I think 3 or 4 years ago. And I was part of the away contingent that night, and that was the first time. Obviously, I knew all about the history of Accrington, and that was the first time I'd ever actually engaged with Accrington fans. And I remember sitting in pubs in the town centre and talking to people and thinking, "Wow, bloody hell, this is a great away day. Really friendly people, and absolutely loving it." So I've been to the WAM. I've only watched the one game, but like this season, for sure, because I'm going to be continuing my research, and because I know people up there now, I will definitely be making the effort to go to a few games. Especially, I think in the international breaks when Albion aren't playing, I will definitely be making the trip up north a couple of times to go and watch Accrington. I think this season, in terms of prospects, it's really, really, really difficult to say, because as ever, Accrington have recruited sort of, you know, an array of talent, but so much of it is unknown, coming from non-leagues and sort of basically coming from youth teams of clubs in the Championship and the Premier League. So it's really, really difficult to sort of get a handle on exactly how the squad is going to perform compared to last season. I think one of the things that I would say about League One in general this season is it's a really, really strong league. There's a lot of really, really good teams in that. I think you could justifiably make the claim that there's about 12 teams in the league who would feel that they should be aiming for the playoffs. And there's some absolutely huge clubs in the league, like Sunderland and Ipswich and Charlton and MK. Well, they're not a huge club, but they've got a lot of resources. And then obviously Rotherham, who've just come down, tend to do really, really well. And there's such... Well, you
got Wednesday and Portsmouth too.
Yeah, oh, exactly. Yeah. Huge clubs with massive resources. And my fear is that honestly, this season, I see no real difference between the sort of the top half of League One and the bottom half of the Championship. I think it's that good. I think a top half finish for Stanley this season would be a fantastic achievement, given the amount of talent that's in the league. And there's no reason to assume, after how good they were for the last season, they couldn't do that. Well,
I think you when you look at the playoffs in League One, you've got to be in for promotion or playoffs. You got to be in the top 6. And you mentioned so many teams. I think there's always in League One there could be a dark horse, and I think I think Stanley, we had Lincoln last year that did well. And I think a lot of people are hoping that will be Stanley this year. But you've got to have a lot of luck go your side. You've got to stay healthy. You've got to get the results against teams that you're supposed to. But I think it's one of the things that now, as a Stanley fan, I think we look at it. We don't look at a survival in League One. We look at pushing forward and challenging for a playoff. But we don't get too big of ourselves where we think, well, if we don't get a playoff spot, that's the end of it, kind of thing. Yeah. But I think I think what you're doing is great. And as I say, Phil and I both enjoy being part of your process and being interviewed. And it's what we do across the pitch is we try to spread the word and document Stanley, which we've been doing over the last few years with player interviews, owner interviews, and that sort of thing. Because it's documented now for people to go and see in our library of podcasts. But this is unique and I think different from what we normally do with players. And I think it's been for me, very informative. And I just think I just want to thank you for the work you have done and you are doing in fair game. I know also for with your thesis on Stanley. So as like we want to say, as we like to say to people that come on, that working on these sort of things, is continued success. And let's hopefully we'll see you at the Wham when West Brom are playing, and that's when we're in the championship, not when you drop down.
I bloody well hope so.
Yeah,
I just like I said, I just hope it's been interesting for people. I'm aware, like I said, I'm in the middle of writing it at the moment, and I'm sort of I'm just up to my ears in sort of ridiculous academic jargon and language and stuff. So I'm hyper aware that basically what I'm talking about is football, and it's a universal language. And I think when I have to write in this sort of academic style, I tend to disappear at my own backside a bit. So I hope I've not been too.
Oh no, it's just been great
with stuff I've been saying. So yeah,
I've really enjoyed it, and I'm sure Phil will echo my thoughts. Is that it's been educational for us to learn about the journey you've been on and the road ahead for you. I think it's been great.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much.
Well, absolutely. Like Tony said, this has been a unique show compared to, like a player interview or something like that. And I've really, really enjoyed this. And I really enjoyed our chat a month ago when I talked to you for your thesis project. And, like Tony said, just continued success with everything that you're doing because it's such important work. And we always like to finish up with an on Stanley on. I know you're a Baggies fan, but we'll give an on Stanley on, and it'll be up to you if you want to throw one in.
Absolutely, I've got no qualms about that. I love the club now, so yeah, on Stanley on, absolutely.
On Stanley on.
Cheers, Josh.
Cheers,
guys.